views and opinions expressed in this program are those of the participants and do not necessarily reflect the views of BronxNet or the program underwriters.
Welcome to today's verdict. I'm your host and trial attorney, David Lesch. We switch gears today, focusing on the criminal justice system, in particular, a particular act which will hold police officers accountable. State Senator Kevin Parker will be here to discuss that, as well as the deplorable conditions throughout the arraignment court. And we have a staff attorney from Legal Aid, whose name is Julie Sender. She will be here as well. Much to get to. Stay tuned. Today's verdict starts right now. Welcome back to today's verdict. I'm your host, David Lesch. We have State Senator Kevin Parker with us with a very important topic that I want to discuss, police accountability. Senator, thanks for being here today.
No, David, thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
It's our pleasure. So police accountability, it's been a while since I've been in law school talking about excessive force, but what you're doing right now is extremely important. Why don't you tell the viewers a little bit about the act itself and pardon the pun, and where we're heading in this state when it comes to excessive force.
Well, David, as you know, at the height of the pandemic last year and around June of 2020, we had the murder of George Floyd. And after that, subsequently, we had a number of protests and riots, not just throughout New York City, New York State, but the nation and really the world. And at that time, the state of New York was the first state in the entire country to pass a comprehensive set of legislative, proposals that became law. There's about 10 laws that were made. 4 of them were mine, including the 911 False Reporting Act, a law that created a body camera program for state police, another that created an Office of Police Misconduct in the Attorney General's office, as well as one that reaffirmed the right to record police activity. And again, how important was that within the context of the Derek Chauvin case? And we did 6 other things, probably most notably 50A, which helped us get the records of police officers so we can enter them into the record, into the court record so that we could prosecute bad police officers. And the other was the special prosecutor bill, which essentially in any case in which a police officer is involved with a crime, that automatically the Attorney General becomes a special prosecutor instead of the DAs because of the inherent conflict between local DA's offices and local police departments, right? And so we did some things and we took some really important steps thanks to the people in the street and the protesters and the folks in our communities who demanded that police reform be done in the state of New York. But it was only a first step. And there's so much really more that needs to be done. And one of the things that I have been kind of focused on is this issue of defining excessive use of force. And to this moment, excessive use of force is really a term of poetry in the state of New York. It doesn't actually exist within the law. And so what the bill I put in with the guidance of the Attorney General is a bill that defines what excessive use of force is in the state of New York.
So, when I was in law school, as we learned it, and I don't practice criminal law, but I remember it's using lethal force based on an officer's reasonable belief that an individual committed a particular crime. It could be, a felony, attempted felony, but it was always loose as to what that is, and it took many cases and case law for judges to try and carve out a niche as to what is considered to be excessive force. And it's always been that way, the term of poetry. What can you do, or what can the bill do to really sharpen it up so we know exactly what you can do and what you can't do?
Right. So I've been working with Assemblyman Nick Perry on this issue for a number of years. And again, recently, the Attorney General has entered the fray and has come out with a program bill that me and the Assemblyman have picked up and we're pushing forward. And what this bill essentially does is defines both for the public, but most importantly for police officers and for police departments, what police officers can and cannot do, what excessive use of force is currently. And what they'll tell you is the opposite. But the reality is right now is very ambiguous. What this law does is sharpen to a point what can be done and what are the circumstances in which a police officer can and cannot use force in order to detain a suspect or to execute an arrest.
Can you give an example, maybe, of something that would be considered to be excessive in a particular situation?
Yes. So, for instance, if there is someone, if there's somebody who's suspected of a crime, right? The way it currently is now, depending on the crime, it's a very severe crime. An officer in this moment, under the current lack of law, really, can actually discharge their weapon, killing a person if they suspect that that person is a person, not whether they actually know for certain, but if they suspect that this person is the person who committed this heinous crime, they can, essentially be judge, jury, and executioner in that moment. We really want to take that away with this, and we really want people to be arrested and folks to have their constitutional right to be tried by their peers in a court. And so what the current bill does, if it becomes law, would in fact say that in executing an arrest, an officer must essentially use every means under every means that the officer has to execute the arrest without using their weapon before they use their weapon.
Now, when you talk about weapons, you're obviously talking about their firearm, but what about tasers?
Yeah.
What about other things? Can they use that to try and detain the subject? I'm a little confused.
Well, don't be confused, right? So you're really supposed to just work up, essentially from the bottom up, right? From, trying to make an arrest without using any weapon at all to, in fact, if you need a weapon, if, obviously if it's a problem. Now, again, in a split second decision, an officer is going to do what an officer does. And we don't believe that this law stops split-second decisions. But many times in the circumstances that we've seen, we're not dealing with split-second decisions that officers are making. I mean, people bring that up, but when you see the videotape, if you see Derek Chauvin being choked out over 9 minutes and 46 seconds.
That's not a split decision.
That's not a split-second decision, right? No. If you see what happened in Staten Island, right, with Eric Garner, that wasn't a split-second decision. Right. And so in split second decisions, those circumstances are already covered. But when we're talking about excessive use of force, did you in fact need to use an illegal chokehold on Eric Garner in order to execute that arrest? And the public believes not, which is why he was fired and sued, and which is why the city of New York had to pay damages behind that. Right. And so we don't want to keep spending tax dollars paying excessive use of force claims. We want police officers to serve and protect, but we believe that they can do so with dignity and respect. And we want to make sure that our officers are safe, but we also want to make sure that our public is safe as well.
Listen, there's always pushback. There's pushback all the time, and which is completely normal. It's part of our process. Are the prosecutors pushing back to the point where you really have to let them understand exactly that there's been just a fundamental change in our society, or are they going with this and making it a little bit easier for you to get this bill into law?
No, we're not getting pushback from prosecutors. We're getting pushback from obviously the police unions and police departments, and particularly, we have a specific problem, obviously in the suburban parts, even in Democratic districts, from white members, who represent police officers who don't feel like they should police their constituents, right? The reality, though, is that in New York City, we have an occupying force of police officers primarily from suburbs who come in to police primarily Black and Latino communities, and they're doing it in a way in which they're manifesting force that is unnecessary.
I see it all the time. I live in Manhattan, but my office right now, I'm across the street from the courthouse in the Bronx. I spend my life. I see a different type of police officer in Manhattan that I see across the street from the courthouse here. Completely different attitude, completely different way that they deal with my constituents as opposed as they deal with me back in the city. I mean, it's completely true. But we do have an issue now in this city in terms of crime is on the uptick. We have a new mayor who's going to be coming in. What are your thoughts about that? Do you think that maybe the tide is turning the other way, where you're going to have to make a few concessions with respect to law enforcement?
Well, first, let me just say congratulations to Eric Adams, presumptively our new mayor, at least the Democratic nominee for mayor in the city, and we expect that he will become the next mayor. I consider him a friend. We served in the Senate together. We sat next to each other for 6 years in the Senate. And so very proud of him and his achievement. I think he's going to be great for the city, particularly he's actually, in the state of New York, the highest ranking police officer ever to become an elected official. And so I think he comes to this job with a sensibility of understanding both what it means to be an African-American male growing up in the outer boroughs and having, negative interactions with police officers, but also being a police officer who for, over 20 years served and protect the city, at the highest level. And so I think that it's going to be an important issue. And yes, you're right. There has been an uptick, and we certainly need to address it. I don't think that, I don't think excessive use of force is part of what happens, right? Let me just say this. Benjamin Franklin, was quoted as saying, if you are willing to give up, some privacy, your public protection for safety, then you deserve neither, right? And so in this moment, we should not be creating this false dichotomy between, fighting crime and abusing tenants, abusing residents. And this is particularly, again, pointed in Black and Latino communities, because again, if we were seeing excessive use of force among young white teenagers, this wouldn't be an issue. It would happen one time or two times and it would be over because the white community would not put up with this. But, it really is white supremacy that we're dealing with here, where we have white officers by and large who believe that they can, abuse Black and Latino young people primarily. But that attitude is also, leaked into many Black and Latino officers as well, and Asian officers and others, right? And so it becomes this kind of police culture versus the people of the city of New York, and we certainly don't want that. I think the vast majority of police officers are fine individuals and human beings, and are people who want to serve and protect, and people who have put themselves on the line every single day to do the right things for our community. However, there is a minority of officers out there who come to work and do not have, unfortunately, the best intentions of our communities in hand, and they take things to a place that they really don't need to go. And I really want to, pass this law in order to, in fact, create some clear marks of delineation in terms of what officers can and cannot do. And this is not simply me saying it. This is the Attorney General of the state of New York, who has put this bill in and said that we need to clearly define what excessive use of force is in the state law, so that we can have not just the citizenry understand, but more importantly, police officers understand what they can and cannot do.
Well, Senator, we're gonna have to leave it there. There's so much more I'd love to go into this with you, and good luck with the bill, and hopefully we'll have you back soon.
David, I'd love to come back. Thanks so much for having me.
Our pleasure. All right, stay with us. Today's verdict has so much more right after this. Welcome back to today's verdict. We've had some issues throughout the city concerning the deplorable conditions when you have to go before a judge for arraignment. And today we have Julie Sender here from the Legal Aid Society. Julie, thanks for being here today.
Sure, it's my pleasure.
So, first and foremost, even though COVID seems to be winding down, Can you walk us through a little bit about the criminal court situation right now and just the processing of arraignments and the processing of those who have to go through the system? Maybe you can give the viewers just a little bit of an overview of what's been happening as we move from COVID to out of COVID.
Sure. So, in short, not much is happening, meaning that the process, when someone is in New York City, someone is arrested, they're taken to the local precinct, they're processed, and then in Manhattan, in all the boroughs, but I'll just explain Manhattan, they're then brought down to 100 Center Street to central booking. And in the basement of the building, they're processed, and then they're eventually brought up to the arraignment part, to the cells in the arraignment part. There's lawyers in the courtroom. The clerks bring us paperwork, and we go in the back and we interview the client, we interview our clients, and then we come out into the courtroom and appear before the judge for bail applications, whatever. So that's the process. There's certain courtrooms that are set aside just for arraignments. So people are open to the public, people are welcome to come into the front, and then in the back is where the cells are. The main courtroom, the larger courtroom, we call AR1 or AR3, depending on if it's day or night, has two very large cells in the back, which are, each cell is then divided into, has three separate little interview booths. So the arrestee is on one side and the lawyers come in from the other side, and we theoretically are able to have private conversations within this booth. So I don't know if you saw the photographs that were
I did, and we're running them also right now so the viewers can see them as well.
So those photographs were taken, those were the photographs taken from the attorney side. That is the working condition, that's the attorney side. Where we go, the attorneys go in where we sit to meet with our clients. Those photographs could have been taken, they could have been taken in March 2020, they could have been taken in March 2018. They were in fact taken on June 28th, 2021. And I say that because the conditions have always been filthy and unclean, and we've always, not just the lawyers, but there's interpreters, there's police officers that are back there, corrections officers that are back there, court personnel that go back there occasionally, but it's primarily the lawyers who are there. We've gotten sick, we've been those things. We assumed that because COVID made everybody, all of us, so aware of the connection between, cleanliness, really keeping things clean and safe and sanitized, and health, that something would be done. Everything was closed during the pandemic. Things closed down in, I think, March 20th, 2020 was the last day that there was in-person arraignments. And nothing changed. We had asked, meaning lawyers from the Legal Aid Society had asked for access to the back to do test air quality, to look at the conditions before returning to in-person. We were denied. The administrative judge said, I think, basically said it's not going to happen, would not let us back there. OCA would not let us back there to look and test. And I have to say, I've spoken, there are some court officers who I think are amazing, who work throughout the arraignment, throughout the pandemic. They were in the courtroom every single day. And they told me that nothing was cleaned, that they literally cleaned the inside of the courtroom themselves. They had to wipe off the desks and keep everything clean themselves. Nothing was done to try and keep them clean and safe. And then they've just returned to in-person literally without cleaning anything. And this was just a unique opportunity for the court system to really reevaluate how they do things, how we do things, to avoid a complete shutdown in the future, and nothing was done. Not just cleanliness, not just cleaning, but just reimagining or thinking about how we can proceed going forward.
Well, who is it OCA that's responsible? Who is responsible for making sure that somebody comes in there every morning and cleans the area? Who's supposed to do that?
It's a combination. And everybody's pointing the finger. OCA is saying it's not our responsibility. It's DCAS, it's their responsibility. It's the city's responsibility. But it's can I just say two things? One, there's been nothing but finger pointing. there's been no really acknowledgement by any of these organizations about that. Yes, these are horrible conditions and we should see what we can do about fixing them, or just acknowledging the conditions that they've had their employees work under. But it's a combination. OCA is on the ground. They see what's going on. They have their, like I said, the administrative judge who was back there, who was, my understanding was in court when things began reopening earlier this year, was able to see what was going on. They say OCA claims to be the tenants and that DCAS is the landlord, but I mean, that may very well be, but they're aware of the situation. And so it's their responsibility to bring it to the attention of the landlord and make sure that the landlord acts and cleans.
Well, when you say they're aware, do they come in and inspect themselves? Do they send, I mean, is it just the court officers who tell them because they're employees, or the court personnel that are there as well? When you say they're aware, do you send them pictures? I mean, lawsuits can be brought against OCA for these types of conditions. How do you make them aware?
We've told them, we've brought it to their attention. We've said, things need to be cleaned up, on each level, the people on the grounds, there are the administrators that are there on the ground, they have eyes, they can see, they were there. They were in there installing the plexiglass. So they were physically in that area, putting up plexiglass so they could see that these conditions are there. And those conditions from the arraignments, those are egregious, but it's in every level of the building. I mean, who tells them? Well, it's their responsibility to be aware of the conditions, the working conditions of I guess you can call them their employees, because they are all, for the most part, OCA employees that are staffing that building.
All right, so let's take it further. You have a tenant and you have a lawyer. You have a tenant and you have a landlord, just like in any building when you think about it. Will an action be brought? Can an action be brought? Legal aid certainly has the opportunity to be able to bring some type of proceeding to force OCA as the tenant or DCAS as the landlord. What other than like shows like this, really, which, of course, brings it into the light for the public to see, but sometimes it takes a good lawsuit to get people to start to react and to do. What are your thoughts, or what is legal aid? What are they going to do in terms of maybe filing papers?
I can't speak for legal aid. You'll have to talk to Janet Sable or Tina Luongo. I can't speak for legal aid. I can speak for ALAA. And we have been, lobbying. We've been lobbying with the city. We've been lobbying with the state. We've been lobbying with legal aid. But I can't. I'm not a spokesperson for the Legal Aid Society per se, so I can't speak.
So we don't know if there really may be any federal violations. Right, just individual right violations, which many times are brought in federal court to force the state to do what they're supposed to do. Moving a little on, because I know you have to be in court yourself, as I do as well, at least virtually myself. In terms of processing these cases and getting them moving from the arraignment part, into see the judge, to get the court, to get it heard. During the beginnings of COVID, it was very difficult to get this process moving. Is it moving a little faster, at least? Do we find that we're getting back to a sense of normalcy, or is it the same old story?
I mean, that's not a simple question. I think that I will say that during COVID, we were doing online arraignments, and things were moving relatively smooth, as well as could be done for virtual. And I think the processing issues are there as well. I mean, in terms of how fast someone can be arraigned from arrest to arraignment, there has been from years and years and years ago that there is a 24-hour rule. Someone is supposed to be brought before arraignment within 24 hours. I think for the most part, everybody's trying to see that happens. There are some delays. There are, snafus or bureaucratic delays, but I think for the most part that is happening.
That's fine. And are you happy with the fact that we're moving back into in-person as opposed to the virtual world that you and I are still in right now? Would you maybe think of a hybrid model that would work just as well? What are your thoughts on that?
I absolutely think we should be doing a hybrid. I think that the way the courts were working before was ridiculous and inefficient. You had people who were coming literally as minor misdemeanor cases or for status updates that were having to take a day off of work every 2 weeks, every 3 weeks to come to court, to sit around all day long just to be told, oh, no grand jury action, no supporting deposition, people not ready, status updates. And I think that one of the advantages with having more and more things be done virtual is that people were able to appear without having to lose their jobs or take time off work or childcare issues, because so many of these matters you don't need to have the hundreds and hundreds of people who are literally just sitting around in court all day long for nothing. So I think, again, that is what I was saying, is to have been able to reimagine the way that we practice law, that it's working much better on the Supreme Court level, where we now have time certain, and where things don't require people, taking the entire day off just to come sit around court all day long for a 5-minute appearance.
Before we let you go, because we don't have too much time, and I know you have to leave as well. Usually when I have somebody on from Legal Aid, I'd like them to give the viewers a little bit of some tips, or what they can take away if unfortunately they happen to find themselves in the arraignment part. Maybe something you could tell someone who's watching today, they have a son or daughter or somebody else that unfortunately is arrested or has been in the system. What would you tell them in terms of just dealing with the unsanitary conditions, or just maybe give them, I'm not saying a pep talk, but maybe you can give them something that they can hang their hat on if unfortunately they find them in a situation where they were waiting before they see a judge?
Well, exactly what you said. The best is try and stay calm. Try and stay calm, because it is probably going to be one of the worst situations you're in your life, when you're being arrested, being processed, being in jail. But there will be an end in sight. You will be brought. You will see a lawyer, and just try and stay calm. Try and keep track of numbers, of contacts of some, of family members or somebody that could be reached for contact, and just try and keep the facts of the situation fresh in your minds and focus on that. But yeah, you will, there will be an end in sight. You will see somebody, and really just the best advice is just to try and stay calm.
Well, Julie, we really appreciate it. It's great advice. It's a tough situation for everybody involved, and hopefully those conditions will improve with the help of Legal Aid and different organizations. And hopefully you'll come back and give us a little bit of update and see how things are going.
Thanks so much for having me.
It's a total pleasure. All right. We have so much more with today's verdict coming back right after this. That's all that we have for today. I'd like to thank both of my guests for joining us, and of course you, the viewers, for watching. If you have an issue or a topic that you'd like me to focus on during today's verdict, just email me at davidlesch@bronxnet.org. Until we see you the next time, always remember, know the issues, reach a verdict. We'll see you in 2 weeks.